Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome our guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Good to be here, Arnie.
No worries, you worried me then. And brother Wallace Klinck from the western
If
side
you
of
can hear
Canada.
me.
Good
We
to
can
be,
hear you. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
Wallace.
good to be here from Western Canada. I guess you've been a very busy man list for the last little while, so
We have. We've been particularly busy. We've had the National Weekend seminar and some very interesting speakers. So keep a close eye on the Bright Eon video channel and also YouTube, and you'll see all the speakers there, and also the Actionist Training Conference, which was also most encouraging. So yes, a good result for the weekend, very good result for us, and some particularly interesting people to discuss things. Now, I want to cut across our topic for today, turning back to reality. Now, the topic for today is actually drawn from the thought from the week written by Geoffrey Dobbs in 1951 on Planning the Earth. Geoffrey started to write on Planning the Earth around 1944, and it was first produced in book form. There was about 12 papers. It was produced in book form in 1951. And in this thought for the week, he's essentially encouraging us that at a certain stage in history and culture, you've got to consider turning back to reality instead of following a path, a utopian path. And that's what we're seeing in the world about. It's a utopian, it's a dream, and it's not a bound in reality. It's not bound in the real world. But the outcome in the real world, of course, is one of oppression and totalitarianism. But the dream is one of some sort of utopia, which of course it's not. This is the Marxist perspective that somehow or other we're going to head towards a utopia, but in actual fact, it's tyranny and oppression. Turning back to reality, Robert Klinck.
Well, we seem to be under a multi-phase attack in our understanding of reality in all respects. And it's very interesting that this attack is occurring simultaneously in all, certainly Western countries. There were intimations of it, I guess. The phenomenon of abortion, its widespread acceptance, and now it's being pushed right to the day before delivery. And probably some people have even said that the option to get rid of children should be extended beyond delivery, and the transsexual movement that has been made so magnified into a great issue, whereas it's always been sort of a marginal thing in society that people didn't pay too much attention to, but now it's being used as a flail on society and to drive it in ways in which freedom of speech is being subverted. We've had multiple wars going on since the Second World War. It's a constant state of warfare. And the attempt has been made to suggest that these are efforts that are going to spread freedom and democracy through the world, but that's not the result we're seeing. It's been a disaster with reasonably successful countries. I mean, we wouldn't agree with everything that's being done in them, but they were delivering a lot of benefits to their populations, and then those countries were just demolished, shattered, and there's hardly anything functional left in them. We've had the climate crisis thrust upon us, and now we're being told that we should be listening to basically children who are having a tremendous emotional reaction to propaganda that's been instilled in them. And in fact, I would say that the whole import of the pressure that's being put upon us culturally is to make us have emotional reactions and to make us the slave of other people's emotions.
Mm.
And there's no way you can have a society that functions if it's trying to accommodate everybody's emotions. They can come up with an excuse to do anything to you if that's what we're supposed to do. You know, it used to be said that sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But now, any kind of words that are regarded as hurtful are scandalous, and they're practically grounds for prosecution.
Mm.
We're having an election campaign in Canada right now, and the leader of the Socialist Party was virtually weeping because he was recalling how he's a Sikh, and he was recalling how he and others were bullied when they were in school. He was virtually weeping. Well, I thought, what kind of a Sikh is this? I thought Sikhs were supposed to be manly. They carry little knives and things like that, and they have a military tradition. And now everybody's being reduced to weeping about every kind of potential insult or little hardship that they can have in life.
Mm.
So this is a tremendous departure from reality, and we've got to get back to a position where people have a little bit of steel in their backbones, and they can deal with things in a way that doesn't crush other people around them, because you have to accommodate their emotional reactions to everything.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, Robert. Very good opening salvo. And I will point out that my thoughts in regard to, if you like, Western Christian civilization is that the threats that it's being exposed to, the challenges to its very existence, its justification for being, in itself may be the very seeds that cause it to regenerate and rise up. But boy, is it looking perilous, and is it looking late. Wallace Klinck.
Well, that's right. There's certainly a reaction to every action they say, and provided the reaction is constructive, we have good reason to be hopeful. And we want to play a major role in that if we can. I think you have to recognize that there is a gigantic play for power. These people that are purporting to be standing on the in defense of the oppressed are actually recommending highly centralized and oppressive means, excuse me, like censorship and so on, to enforce the acceptance of their particular conception of things. And this is completely contrary to our traditional search for truth, which we believe is the only way to really progress. What they're suggesting is a static conception of society, wherein society is forced into a certain form that is that conforms with an ideology that is not flexible. It's one of oppression. It's one of an ideology that emphasizes exploitation and ways to overcome exploitation by state action.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't represent personal responsibility or honesty. And they assume that they have the right conception of things, which is a very gross assumption, a very arrogant and conceited position to take. Truth is much bigger than any one of us or all of us. And all we can do is seek it. And to the extent that we find it, benefit from that. We have, you say, turning back to reality. You see, as we've said, there's been an effort to deconstruct existing society. It's necessary. If you're going to achieve power from outside, you have to deconstruct the existing order of things, because that stands as an obstacle in your way. Mm-hmm. And that's what's being done. I was just noticing today there's a young Swedish woman who's come out with a a counter action toward Greta Thunberg, and she is really making the point that things have to reverse, that Sweden cannot be expected to bear the burden of looking after the whole world, and that people are getting fed up with it. And she was unsympathetic towards Thunberg's presentation or position, and also to the powers that are behind promoting her and supporting her campaign. But so, I mean, it's very important. We talked about metaphysics in the last session, and metaphysics is the philosophy under which we'll operate. And every society has some kind of an underlying or overlying philosophy or belief system or way of doing things and looking at things. And we have to seek a relationship with reality if we're going to be successful in our relationships, our personal relationships, our public relationships, our economic relationships, and all relationships. Our lives are relationships. And unless we find and adhere to the proper or to realistic principles of association, we will fail. To the extent that we find realistic principles of association, we will then be able to maximize the results that we get from those relationships to our advantage. And it's terribly important that we not err in this matter. And we have believed, for all our failures, we have believed in freedom, and we have developed a cultural Western European culture that has been second to nothing in the history of man. And before we just throw the whole thing overboard, I think we'd better be very, very careful. I heard in this particular presentation today, so many of reading the comments repeatedly, over and over again, the statement is made, it's capitalism. It's capitalism that has caused all our problems. It's got to go. Well, of course, there is no recognition whatever that what is really causing the problem is finance capitalism, a system of finance that does not coincide with the proper relationships with regard to economic and social affairs. In other words, we have a financial system that is dysfunctional and which has interfered with our economic system. And that economic system is failing because of that. And of course, that is throwing chaos into our social system and is preparing the grounds for some kind of a revolution. And we don't want a revolution that simply overturns and destroys our entire cultural heritage running over 2,000 years.
That's
After
right.
all, that much experience must have some wisdom in it.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's very, very important how you've put that, Wally, that the arguments against, if you like, capitalism are not actually identifying that it's finance capitalism that is the culprit and the manipulation. And in the title of today's discussion, Turning Back to Reality, to me, the thing that comes through my mind is essentially natural law. Natural law, the nature of things, adhering to the nature of things. Now, in the nature of things, we have a vast productive apparatus. Every nation has. In actual fact, we're deconstructing our productive apparatus in the West to hand it over to the East, to hand it predominantly to China, but third world countries in particular. Now that means that we've actually got, if you like, overproduction. Overproduction. We have more than enough, but the big but is, of course, is that we can't actually redeem the debts created by the manufacturing. The system is out of whack. It's out of equilibrium. That's a financial issue, and it's not based on reality. It's not based on the natural law. The natural law that if we consume things in order to produce them, that's the actual price of it. And then once the article or items or industry is produced, then the price is paid, the cost is paid, and so the debt should be redeemed at that point, as soon as it is produced. Now, we're not adhering to the natural law in this area, in particular in this area. And of course, this is, if you like, a significant area of concern, and we've got to take it into account as we turn back to face reality. Robert Klinck.
That's a key point, Arnie, for sure. I was just thinking that the kind of criticism that is leveled against the society we're living in is simplistic almost beyond belief. And the people who are making it have no concept of the complexity of the technology that has brought us to the state we are in, with all the advantages of it. You know, these people.
I think have we just lost you, Robert? We have. Yes, we have. Okay, I'll come back to Robert in a sec. I'm going to cut across just to this particular article again on Planning the Earth by Jeffrey Dobbs, just while we regroup. Now, Jeffrey was writing about on Planning the Earth. He was writing about the Tennessee Valley Authority on Planning the Earth by Jeffrey Dobbs. He was writing about the Tennessee Valley Authority, and that particular writing that we're concentrating on the authority itself and its planning of a vast natural resource for, if you like, corporatized benefit, but the community never actually derived the realistic benefit of the asset. They never actually realized it. They were thrown off their land in order to dam up, produce dams and flood valleys. They were the electricity itself in the Tennessee Valley Authority. When you end up having a seriously good look at it, you realize it was tied in with the Manhattan Project. It was tied in with the development of the atomic bomb, and then further the development of the hydrogen bomb. So when these vast resources are placed at the disposal of, if you like,
No, you and Arnie are talking at once. You're overlapping. You're
okay,
overlaying.
just hang on a sec. I'm recording and I can't pick up Robert at all here, Wally. So he's not actually coming through. I'll just stay with this. So the Tennessee Valley Authority is actually was a, if you like, such a vast resource, an asset that was available to be exploited at the benefit of the authority set up by the government. And that to me is absolutely huge. It's most profound because it went across several states, and of course it was an industry that had an ulterior motive. And the ulterior motive, the purpose behind it, was ultimately domination. It was one of war, one of power. And yet the resources, the asset, the water itself, realistically belonged to the community. It realistically belonged to the community. So when there's a proposal for centralized power or handing more power to world government, as there is with this green movement, with this greenhouse, with this climate argument, it's a proposal to hand these vast amounts of power to a bureaucracy, unaccountable. Then what you're doing is you're leading this individuals in these positions to huge temptation to yield that power in an adverse manner. And we have to seriously take that into account. We've got to seriously consider what it means about handing that type of power to individuals. Because in the end, the United Nations is filled up with individuals. It's not filled up with saints. In fact, every time we look at them, we don't see saints. What we do is we get quite disillusioned by the outcome, the policy, the purpose behind the policy. We get quite disillusioned with the results. And at the moment, of course, we're looking at this fiasco called the European Union and Britain trying to leave. And of course, the bureaucrats, the politicians, are doing nothing of the sort. They're actually defying the community. And that to me is where we've got to look at, well, hang on, has this ever happened before? Have we, as individuals in community, ever had to restore our ancient freedoms? Have we ever had to restore our ancient freedoms? And of course, it's had to happen many, many times in history. Wally Klinck.
Well, our ancient freedoms are gradually being eroded because the financial system continuously and increasingly misrepresents what is actually happening in what is really an amazing productive system. Every time that you make an advance in technology that increases your your allocated costs relative to your labor costs, and that means that your price is inflated
Mm-hmm.
instead of being reduced. Now, when you increase your efficiency, it means you are physically doing something more easily with less expenditure of human and other energy and materials.
Mm-hmm.
And that means, by any system, any logical approach, that means that you should have a falling price level.
Mm-hmm.
That means more access to what your results are flowing from your activities for everyone, rather than less easy access. But of course, because the price is being inflated all the time, we are forced to go in more and more into debt to mortgage our future, to draw incomes from our future rather than our present in order to obtain what we already have produced. I know we've said this before, and it is a very, very profound but seemingly difficult point to make with a lot of people. The medieval theologians grappled with this problem of what they were looking for the just price.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they didn't have the technology that led to the great gap between incomes and costs, and they just weren't able to practically solve that problem. And Douglas did. Douglas said the true cost of production is consumption,
Mm-hmm.
and it's only consumption which we should be charged for. And that means that in the normal course of economics, as we pursue it, we are producing far more than we are consuming.
Mm-hmm.
So logically, that means that the true cost of production is being reduced. And in any logical and sane system, you would have falling prices to represent that realistic relationship, which inheres in the nature of things, in physical relationships. And so people today, though, they ask for higher wages, but higher wages just simply inflate the price of goods and services more.
Mm-hmm.
They do nothing to establish a just price.
Mm-hmm.
And the just price can only be accomplished by new money being created as it is today, but not as a debt owing to the banks or anyone else, but created as a means of giving people access to the flow of wealth that's coming from the system without being accounted as debt.
Yeah.
And you see, it's really upsetting when you see all of these comments attacking capitalism, because it's a la land. It indicates the complete dissociation of thought with the actual conditions which exist.
Mm. Yeah. No, I spent, just to reinforce that a little, Wally, I spent 35 years in oil and gas. And when we first started out, I think there was a dozen people in, if you like, with my skill set, a dozen people in attendance for one refinery all the time, around the clock, 24/7, 365 a year.
Mhm.
And by the time I'd left that industry, the numbers were as little as four to six to do exactly the same job. Now, the advanced control and robotics that we enjoyed, the industry itself was usually a front runner in that, and it brought some specialists over from around the world
Mhm.
to introduce advanced control, computer controlled systems. In actual fact, one of the first blokes we had came from, believe it, Wally, Canada. He came from Canada, and he
Mhm.
did a lot of advanced control programming for our computers in order to optimize the plant and to optimize the yield so that we were able to extract even more for less, even more for less. And of course, with this advanced control, there were less people required to maintain the refinery. And so these numbers over the years gradually dropped. But the price of everything never did. It always increased. And that's if you like, it's a reverse of what was actually going on. Because the industry is forever trying to cut costs to optimize profit. But as they cut costs to optimize profit, there's less going out in wages. And of course, in regard to that, and of course, the level of indebtedness that industry just continues to go through the roof, and it continues to climb. And I note, I note in some industries now that since I've left, their debt levels have doubled And yet they still say they're quite a viable industry. It's incredible that their debt levels have doubled, and I've only been out of the industry 7 years. So it's phenomenal that these things are happening, and that no one is actually seriously, no orthodox economist is looking at the disequilibrium within a financial system, within the price system. They're not actually looking at the real world, just this hypothetical or abstract world that they sort of operate in. And of course, in the abstraction, the reality in the end is the great disciplinarian, and that's what we're seeing. Levels of debt, unprecedented numbers that are longer than telephone numbers in levels of debt, and this is right around the whole world. Wally.
Well, that debt is supported by the issue of more debt,
Mm,
and more debt, and more debt,
hmm.
endless debt.
That's
And
right.
so that just it just allows the price system to the price level to continue to rise.
Hmm.
And it's just coming to some kind of a culmination, one would think, because it's just unsustainable
Mm,
in the end, unless you consider that the expansion of money and the rise of prices is endless.
mm,
But the problem is there that we're being kept on a treadmill trying to liquidate all this debt, and we're not getting the benefits we should in a richer and a more cultured and a more civilized and leisured life where we can actually enjoy the results of what we're doing. Uh, we're driven into increasingly more and more activity, which has less and less relationship to our real well-being.
mm.
All war activity does not generate a better standard of living, except for the people who earn the money in the process, who are able to go back and buy goods that are produced in the past. But
Hmm.
why didn't they have sufficient income at that time in order to
That's right.
obtain those
Yeah.
goods? That's the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Why should
And
they
you
have to
see,
go to war? Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
Alberta is in a turmoil, of course, because of the attack that's going on our energy industry. We have, I think, the third largest reserves of oil in the world.
Hmm.
And it has been a sustaining thing for us because of its the exports that it's allowed us to make. In other words, we've drawn in money from other jurisdictions by selling more than we have imported.
Hmm.
And that has allowed us to be fully employed. But is the end of a life being fully employed?
Mm.
That's the question.
Yeah.
And so it's simply a matter. And now, of course, you have the oil industry and its supporters engaged in a very defensive action, trying to defend their interests because of the opportunities they see for investment and for income in the industry through exports.
Mm.
Now, you see, the thing of it is, we should not be concerned over it from the standpoint of exports, because not from the standpoint of exports that are engaged in to fill the price income gap within our domestic economy. We should be doing that instead of filling it with debt or with money brought in from external areas,
Hmm.
other jurisdictions. We should be doing it internally.
Mm.
Anything we produce for ourselves internally, we should be able to finance the consumption of internally.
Hmm.
And what you do, of course, is what happens to the other jurisdictions which have to borrow in order to bring in your particular product, in this case, energy, which is an expensive thing.
Hmm.
What do? They either don't do, or they have to go into debt in order to do it.
Mm.
So what we're not doing a favor to other jurisdictions, and we're not doing a favor to ourselves. And yet it's the conservative elements, I'm afraid, who are behind the industry, who have legitimate concerns, but who are thinking in terms of creating jobs.
Mm.
And it's not jobs that rational people look for, except you need to have trained people to do certain things. You have to have a core body of
Mm.
qualified people to carry out certain activities.
Hmm.
But the object of the economy is not to produce jobs, it's to produce goods and services for men and women,
That's right.
for people,
Yeah. Exactly
and to
right.
allow them, yes, and
Mm.
in abundance, so that they don't have to spend their entire life in a state of slavery,
Hmm.
trying to produce more and more at increased debt,
Hmm.
irredeemable debt,
Mm.
in order to survive. This is a form of outright slavery.
That's right. Yeah, and we're being mesmerized because we
Mesmerized.
link income to employment, and this is a disconnect because the fact is employment 150 years ago, 85% of employment was in the agricultural industry, and now
Mhm.
it's less than 5%. So by rights, 80% of the population, of the working population, should now be able to achieve a state of increased leisure because the food is being produced by so few. And the sufficiency in the or the insufficiency in the financial system should be found equilibrium, that the people who are receiving that leisure should also receive sufficient spending power to buy what is being produced. That's the point. This is the social credit argument, that the financial system is in disequilibrium, that every time you need to get something from the shelf in the supermarket or from the department store or from the car manufacturer or whatever, or a home built, you've got to go to the bank cap in hand and take out a new debt. And that new debt is the only way the economy keeps going. Whereas
That's right.
if it was an issue of a new credit, then the debt is non-existent. The debt is overcome. The new credit is in equilibrium to what is actually being produced. It's a it's a turning back to reality. That's what it is, a turning back to reality. The financial system needs to turn back to reality and stop being the abstract, if you like, mesmerizing facility that it currently is. Closing comments, Wally Kling.
Well, the financial system is supposed to be a representation of what we do, but it is just an abstract system of numbers.
Hmm.
And there is no reason to assume just automatically that it does represent what we do. It doesn't. We have acres and acres of unsold cars.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather leave them unsold
Mm-hmm.
and let them depreciate and eventually send them off to be crushed than they would to distribute those cars.
Hmm.
We have a non-distributive economy. It's static.
Yeah.
It just blocks up at the consumption end, and unless you produce more, well, you can't distribute what you've already produced.
Hmm.
So it brings into question the sanity of the whole thing. I
That's
think
right.
it's quite insane. I mean, it may be sounding a bit extravagant in saying that, but I don't think it's extravagant at all. I think it is probably understating the case.
Hmm.
And so that's the way the system works. And we believe in a sharing society. But if
Hmm.
you say that, conservatives will often go berserk and they will say, "Oh, you're a communist or a socialist
Mm-hmm.
or something of that nature."
Mm-hmm.
No such thing.
Hmm.
Socialism is a centralization of production facilities and processes. It has not it has nothing to do with distribution, and what it does, or it doesn't distribute properly because it is inefficient, because
Mm-hmm.
it interferes with initiative, creativity, and it's done under direction, which is another way of stopping it up. You have to have people who are free to associate, to combine, to disassociate, to associate in ways that are increasingly attractive from the standpoint of their genuine results. And if everything is static in the hands of the state, that's not going to happen. It can't happen because as soon as you try to do something that doesn't conform to the policy that's handed down from the top, you're in big trouble.
That's right. That's right. That's very, very important. I look on this situation as essentially being deprived of my cultural inheritance. I am, as an individual, deprived of my cultural inheritance. If I talk about law and we consider common law, trial by jury, habeas corpus, limited constitutional government, the right to vote, these are all parts of my cultural inheritance. And so it is with technology, advanced control, robotics, automation, nuclear power, electrical power, solar energy, oil, hydrocarbon energy. All these are parts of my cultural inheritance. And I, as an individual, am deprived of that inheritance. Now, in your family, if you were brothers and sisters and siblings and parents passed, you would expect to receive your share. But in a society, our share is actually, if you like, absconded from us or gathered up by the financial system, and they have no right to it. That redistribution, if you like, or that distribution of our cultural inheritance is what is lacking. That is not centralisation of power. That's actually a fair and equitable acknowledgement of the technology that everyone has a right to. And that includes, if you like, even a right to some of the natural assets that we have. Everyone has a right to a sufficiency of water. Everyone has a right to a sufficiency of, if you like, soil so that they can grow their own food if they choose to. And all of these things are being, as Wally says, stopped up. We need to turn back to reality. We need to look at these things again and place them in context in the natural world. It's been a very good session today, Wally. I've really appreciated your input. It's unfortunate we lost the line with Robert, but hopefully he'll be able to fix that up in the near future. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Annie. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. And actually, social credit is a dispersion of power. It's a distribution of power.
That's
It
right.
is not. It is not a concentration. And socialism is a concentration of power.
That's right. That's why
Social credit is the reverse.
Douglas referred to it as economic democracy,
Right.
using your money vote and acting on that every single day. Beautifully put, beautifully thought through. Thank you so much, Wally Klinck.
Goodbye, Annie.